Hello, hello, my friends. AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink. Welcome back to my face and my card making space and more holiday cards. I use this really adorable little mini stamp set, which I think a lot of you might already have. I think this was a freebie a month or two ago. I'll have links to all the things. Very simple watercolor using some positively saturated inks. Pulled out some more oldie but goodie favorites that I have used many, many times. So, simple watercolor, a little bit of emboss resist, splatter, all the things. At the end of the video, I will have a link to my holiday 2025 playlist that I'll just keep adding to as I get things made. I'll have links to everything I used in the description box below the video. My links are affiliate links. That just means that if you click on one of my links and end up placing an order, I do get a little kickback from that at no extra cost to you. That is what helps, keeps the lights on, pays the bills, enables me to keep bringing out content. And yeah, let's get into making these cards. So this is the little mini Warm Thoughts stamp and die set that I'm using. And I have some distress watercolor paper. And I'm going to stamp this little snowman with this little envelope image onto it with the VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink, and I'm going to heat emboss it. It doesn't have to be heat embossed. I've talked about this a lot. I like heat embossing my images when I plan on doing watercoloring. The raised edges of the heat embossing keeps everything a little more contained, so I don't have to worry too much about things bleeding out where they don't belong, etc. And yeah, this little set, even these cards really are not technically holiday cards, but they can be. So I'm including them in my holiday card series. But the sentiments, the images, all of it could just be sort of any occasion, just winter themed. So I used my anti-static powder tool on the watercolor paper first, stamped the image with the VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink, flipped it around, did it a second time, coated it with Simon's Clear embossing powder, and then melted it with my heat tool, tilting it in the light, making sure there's no dull grainy spots, everything is smooth and shiny, and then we're good to go. And then for my watercoloring, I'm using Simon's Positively Saturated inks. Any water reactive ink will work. Regular watercolors, distress inks, whatever floats your boat. So first color I used was Dew, and I just smushed the ink pad onto my little palette. And I'm using my little water brush. You could also just use a paintbrush and a cup of water. Again, personal preference. I tend to reach for my little water brush, even though sometimes it drives me insane. That's also why I always keep a cloth or a paper towel off to the side. One, to wipe my brush in between colors, but also every once in a while when it decides to be drippy, I can just absorb the extra on the cloth. And for the snow areas with this Dew color, I watered it down quite a bit. So very, very light, just to give it that little hint of something. And I did the same thing with is this Whale? Yes, just a dark gray shade. But I also watered it down and then just very lightly added it to like his little hat band and a little poof on his little hat, just to give it that little bit of shading. And then used it a little fuller strength. And this little tiny bird, I think he's a chickadee. Not that it really matters. I just do whatever. And then for his little carrot nose, I just used clay and painted that. This type of watercoloring, anyone can do this. Very, very simple. Nothing too crazy. It's more just filling in each area. I'm not doing any sort of shading or actual watercolor techniques, anything like that. It's no, just pick up the color and paint. The only areas where on the actual, snow is very light hand. More water, less color. Other than that, though, everything else I just fill in. So I used the mocha shade for the little post of the little mailbox and for his little arms. And then I watered that down as well. So it's less color, more water, just to paint the rest of the little birdie. And then hardly any color at all. Just add a little bit, just a hint to the envelope he's holding. And then for my red, I'm using Cranberry. This is where a person needs to be a little more careful. Again, not difficult. It's just red. red likes to get everywhere. This is also why I love to heat emboss my images. Just to keep the red contained, because it wants to. It just wants to go everywhere. It wants to stain everything. It wants to get on your fingers and leave, fingerprints. It's just red. I've talked about it a lot. I like, pops of red here and there. It's just, you just need to always be aware of the red. So I painted the little mailbox and his hat with the red. And then for his little scarf, I used dusk, so like a navy, or more of a navy shade. And then decided to do red and blue little stripes on his scarf. So just alternating them. So painting half of them with the dusk shade and then the final ones with that same cranberry shade. Just keeping it simple. So worked my way through. And then my final little last touch, I pulled out Ballerina, just a really pale pink. I could have attempted to water down the red, but that gets a little... So just a smidge, just a little bit of that Ballerina pink. And I painted that to give him just the hint of rosy little cheeks. Kind of silly on a snowman, but I don't care. It's cute. So when I was done painting this, let it dry, which didn't take very long. I die cut it with a coordinating wafer die, set it aside. And then I die cut some white cardstock with one of the rounded tags wafer dies. I also use my anti-static powder tool on it. And then along the top of these tags, I'm stamping the snowflakes from that Warm Thought stamp set with just clear embossing ink and coating them with the same clear embossing powder. So these are going to look like nothing at first, obviously. It's even hard sometimes to really see where I've stamped. So sometimes I'll stamp and then I'll apply the embossing powder just so I can see where I'm going. So I got those stamped along the top. Melt these again with my heat tool till everything is shiny. And then to make the snowflake show up, emboss resist. So just blending ink over it. So this is where I'm going to use that same dew shade. That's what I use to paint the little snowman and snow areas. So going in with a blending brush and just blending from the top of the tag down and just letting it fade to white. So I've sped this up in editing, but this still didn't take very long. But I started with a light hand at first and then just slowly sort of built it up until I was happy with being able to see the snowflakes and then letting it fade. So because they were heat embossed, the heat embossing resists the ink and then you can see it, which is always just it's such a simple technique, but it's always fun. It's kind of like magic, when whatever you stamped in heat emboss just shows up again. So I set those aside. And then I used some soft navy cardstock and I ran that through my machine with the Cheery Snowflakes embossing folder. This came out a couple years ago or so. I've used it many times. This is a very subtle embossing folder. It's not deep. The images are not super raised, but the detail, lovely. So after I embossed them, I took a white pigment ink pad, and I've done this in the last couple videos as well. That's just my current fixation. Easiest way to add detail. So white pigment ink pad, and I'm not pressing it. I'm barely even touching the cardstock. It's hard to explain, but you can just feel it once the ink pad hits the raised areas. So zero pressure whatsoever. I'm practically floating the ink pad across, and it's just picking up all that raised detail. And with this one, love it. And I'm not worried if I get any random little ink smears. I managed to mostly not, but I would also let these fully dry before manhandling them and cutting them down. But this is going to be the background. There's other things going on here. I'm going to add splatter, so I wasn't worried about it. So I trimmed them down a bit and then set those aside. And then rather than add twine or ribbon or anything to my tags, I die cut bows. So I used a little Pretty Bows 2 die set. And I die cut scraps of Simon's Schoolhouse Red cardstock and die cut my little bows. And then I just took a little blending brush and I added the cranberry ink first, which won't show up. It shows up when it's wet, but this shade of ink on the Schoolhouse Red cardstock, no. It's when it dries, it'll look like nothing. But this kind of just primes the cardstock. And then I went in with Sangria, which is a bit darker. This also dries back quite a bit, especially on such a deep red cardstock. If you want more, you could go, you would need to go darker and maybe even add a little bit of brown. I showed that in a recent video as well. But this just gives it just a smidge of dimension. So I'd added my ink blending, cleaned up that red ink so that I don't get it everywhere. And then I glued the bows together just to give them like more dimension. So just added a bit of liquid glue and then pinched them together with my little reverse tweezers. And then those are going to get adhered to the top of my tags. So for the tags, I'm going to pop these up with Simon's Big Mama foam tape. This roll is very close to being used up. I don't know why I told everyone during a live stream that I was like, oh, this will last me till the end of the year. You know, I think my adjusted, I'll be, it's not going to last to the end of the month. Anyway, pop the tags up with the Big Mama foam tape, adhere the bows, and then pop my little characters up with that foam tape as well. Again, just build that little bit of dimension. And then another oldie but goodie favorite that I have used a bunch of times this year is the Snowflake frame die set. I just use the individual snowflake dies from the set like all the time. They're perfect for little accessories. So again, I die cut scraps of white glitter cardstock with those little snowflakes and then adhering them to my card, cutting some of them apart so I can just tuck them, you know, under the tag. Just build that scene. So getting those adhered with the liquid glue. Once these are in place, I'm going to add splatter. You could skip this, but you guys know I love me some splatter. So once I get my little snowflakes in place, I can put these into my splat box. And I'm just going to use Simon's Positively Perfect White Splatter Medium, which needs to be stirred up. I was going to say shaken. I don't recommend shaking this. It's habit for me. I like to shake it, but if you shake it, it gets up into like the lid, and then I get it all around the threads, and then I keep sealing this jar shut. So don't shake it, just stir it really good. So stirred it up, used my fan brush, added a good healthy amount of splatter to these, set them aside. My card bases are top folding A2 white note cards, so 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. And on the insides of the cards, I inked up the image with that same dew ink. So stamped that on the insides of my cards. And then I took the other sentiment from the set. I'm going to line that up. Plus there's a little tiny heart, super cute. So I'm going to line both of those up. The sentiment I'm going to ink up with that Nocturne ink, and the heart I'm going to ink up with the cranberry ink. Just gives it that little finishing touch. Love it. So yeah, like I said, these can totally be like any occasion cards because it just says sending you warm thoughts on a cold winter's day. Love it. And then the Just a Note sentiment, also from that set, I had just white heat embossed that onto scraps of the Schoolhouse Red cardstock, die cut it with a coordinating wafer die cut a scrap with the same wafer die, layered them together just to give that sentiment just a smidge more dimension. And then I'm going to adhere that to my card base, and I adhered the card fronts to the card base as well. And once that's in place, as my like final little embellishment, I have these little red clay hearts that I like to use a lot. However, these are very light compared to this like Schoolhouse Red shade of cardstock, etc. So I just color them with Copic marker. Any alcohol marker would work. Just darkens them up a little bit and gives it that little extra just depth so that they're not so washed out looking. Depending on what I'm doing, I usually don't do this, but this red is very intense, this cardstock, and you know, so it took me 2 seconds to add that little bit of color with the alcohol marker, and then I just adhere them into place with little dabs of craft tacky glue. Picked them up with my embellishment wand, pressed them into place, let the glue dry, and these cards are complete. They're just so cute. This image is adorable. And we got snowflakes and splatter and little cardstock bows, especially if we don't like tying bows. It's not for everyone, I know. And also it doesn't create a whole lot of dimension when you use just die-cut cardstock bows versus, you know, ribbon. So these are fun. Like I mentioned, I'll have links to all of the things in the description box below, and I'll link to my playlist at the very end if you want to check that out. Thank you all so much for watching, thumbs upping, commenting, subscribe if you haven't. I'd love to have you. And I'll see you all very soon in the next video. Bye. Thank you so much to my amazing Patreon supporters. For anyone that might be interested in joining my Patreon community and supporting me, the link to my Patreon is in the description box below the video. For everyone else, as always, thank you all so much for taking the time to watch my videos, for thumbs upping, commenting, subscribe if you haven't, I'd love to have you. And here's a couple other videos for you to check out in case you missed them. Bye!